Hello, and thanks for watching. I'm Alicia Robinson, Cities and Local Government Reporter with the Orange County Register. And with me today is County Registrar of Voters Neal Kelley, who's been Orange County's top election official for the last 17 years. Neal, thanks for joining me. I know there's a lot of information you'd like to share with Orange County voters about the November 3rd election.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alicia, for having me.
So let's get right to the questions because there are a lot of them. So for people who have not voted recently, what can they expect that is different from prior elections as to where, when, and how they're able to vote?
So great question to start off with, because with COVID-19, there are some changes. So we launched the vote centers in Orange County in March. And during that time period, the Voters' Choice Act is what we implemented. And the way that works is that every voter in the county receives a ballot through the mail. They have an extended period of time to vote. And then most importantly, one of my favorites is they can vote at any location throughout the county. So from that standpoint, that's all going to be the same for this upcoming election. The differences are that we will have a 5-day period of voting instead of 11 days like we did in March due to COVID-19. So those in-person options will open on October the 30th and run through Election Day. And then for the option of those that receive their official ballot through the mail, which is every voter in Orange County, they'll have lots of options to return those ballots. And that will start next week on October the 5th when we start mailing those ballots out.
Yeah, and then can you tell me about some of the vote centers are going to have options where they can drive through and actually hand their ballot to a person if they feel more comfortable. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of community groups throughout Orange County over the last several months, including a lot of senior groups, and I heard loud and clear that they wanted an option to hand their ballot to an individual, but not necessarily into a mailbox or not into a drop box. So we're going to operate 42 drive-through locations where a voter can drive up, they'll hand it to one of our official election folks, they'll deposit it into a secure drop box, and then they can drive off. So that'll be in 42 locations throughout the county.
And there's also one location that has a somewhat unique drive-through feature as well. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'm actually pretty excited about that. That's the Honda Center. We have a great partnership with the Honda Center and the Anaheim Ducks. And the beauty of that facility is, number one, it's huge. It's a large location and it's centrally located. It's right off the freeways. It's easy to get into. You know, there's really no parking issues there. But what's going to happen there is you'll have the option of driving through and voting in your car. So if you want to cast an in-person ballot, you'll drive up, we'll check you in, kind of like Chick-fil-A or In-N-Out Burger, forgive the analogy, but that's how it'll work. We'll get you your ballot, you'll have a place to park and mark your ballot, and then we'll collect that from you. You'll also have the option to drive through and drop off a ballot there as well. But then in addition to that, we are going to have a very large super center at that location. About 20,000 square feet we'll be occupying in the concourse there. So lots of opportunities for physical distancing as well as the drive-through options.
And then how can people look up locations to either vote in person or drop off a ballot and find other election information?
I'm really pleased with how our site's turned out. We have recently completely revamped that site at ocvote.com. If you just go to the homepage, there's 3 simple buttons. You're going to choose either my drop-off options, my in-person options, or all of my options. And if you click any one of those, you'll have an option to enter your address, whether it's your office, your home, your friend's house, and it will tell you the closest location right around your location. So it's really easy to use, it's mobile friendly, mobile forward, and ocvote.com is where you want to
go. Now you mentioned that the voting system changed for the March primary, but even other things have changed even since March. For one thing, we're in the middle of a pandemic. So what precautions do you have in place to make the voting experience safe for people who prefer to vote in person?
So we started planning for the presidential election over a year ago, and then this thing called COVID-19 hit us, and exploded in March. And we have done a tremendous amount of planning since then, and we have incorporated federal, state, and local guidelines into our in-person voting options. And I'll just give you kind of a quick high-level overview. When a voter goes to an in-person location, they're going to be greeted with hand sanitizer stations. There'll be lots of signage, clear floor graphics. Our team there will be outfitted in full PPE, face coverings, face shields, and we will offer face coverings to voters if they don't have one. Now, I can't require that they wear one, but we're gonna kindly ask that they do. And then when they go to check in, we'll check them in. We have lots of disinfecting supplies that we'll be using. They'll get a ballot, and here's my favorite part, is we're kind of in the pen business now because we're gonna have a disposable pen for every single voter to use for that ballot. And then finally, when they're done and they scan their ballot, they'll be able to grab their own I voted sticker off of a dispenser. And right before they exit, another stand-up hand sanitizer station. So I've been going out to eat lately, and I feel really good about that and feel safe in the restaurants. But I really have to be honest with you, Alicia, I think people are going to feel really safe when they come to vote. We're going to be prepared for them.
Yeah. And then for people who decide to vote by mail, what do they need to do to make sure their vote gets counted?
So, we have been voting by mail in this country for quite a long time. And in particular, I'd like to point to Orange County voters because our voters on a bipartisan level have adapted to using their ballot they receive through the mail. And it's real simple. What they need to do is when that shows up, they're going to have a couple of options available to them to cast their ballot. They can return it through the U.S. postal system. It's postage paid. They don't need to put a stamp on it. And I would encourage people to, mail it early. If you know who you want to vote for, do it now and get it out of the way, and we'll be prepared to process your ballot. The other options for them, if they don't want to use the postal system, is we have 116 drop boxes throughout the county, very large. They weigh 1,000 pounds apiece, solid steel, very secure, and they can deposit those. My office services those daily, starting when we mail our ballots. And then the third option they have is to go to any one of those vote centers we've been talking about, and they can either drive through and drop it off, or they can go inside and drop it off.
And then when they fill out the ballot, does it matter what color pen they use? And do they need to make sure they sign and seal the envelope and that kind of stuff?
So we will figure out however they mark their ballot in terms of what they use, but we ask that they use a blue or black pen. That makes the automated process much easier for us. If they use a pencil or something like that, we have to duplicate the ballot. So blue or black pen if they can. And then they, of course, need to sign that envelope before they return it and fill out their name and address. And I just want to point out, and you may have already thought about asking this, but the number one reason that ballots have been rejected in Orange County is because people forget to sign them. And what a shame when they go through all that trouble of casting their ballot and then they don't sign it. So just encouraging people to do it early.
And then people may have been hearing that it's possible the mail service is a little slower than it used to be. How far ahead of Election Day do you recommend people get ballots into the mail? And then how can they track the ballot once they've dropped it into either the postal box or an official drop box?
So I would recommend, if at all possible, mail it by Friday before Election Day if you can. That is October the 30th. And if you can do that, that's great. But if you don't do that and you mail it on Election Day, that's okay, because as long as it's postmarked on or before Election Day, we are going to process your ballot. Now, California changed the law because of COVID-19, and I can now receive that ballot up to 17 days after Election Day. But here's an important point. Despite all of the white noise around politics of this, the reality is that has to be postmarked by Election Day. There's no in and out about that. And but if there are postal delays, we can receive it up to 17 days afterwards. And
then you have people have the ability to track the ballot too, right? Once they've dropped it in the Dropbox.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sorry, that's a really good point that you brought up, because that tracking mechanism really provides, I think, extra confidence for voters. If they have a concern about putting it into the postal system or dropping it in a Dropbox, take the time to track it. And you can see the full cycle of that ballot. We invested just a year and a half ago in new technology to track the inbound ballot as well, not just the outbound. So, and I'm telling people that if you're going to track your Amazon package of pet food coming to your house, why wouldn't you track your ballot? I mean, it's just very simple to do. ocvote.com/track, TRACK. And you can sign up for that, and we'll shoot you text messages at every step along the way.
Oh, cool. Okay. And then some voters may have someone offer to help them fill out the ballot or maybe to deliver it for them. Is it okay to do that? And then how can voters protect themselves against, potential election fraud?
Yeah, so, we know that there are individuals in the county that are either disabled or they're elderly and they need assistance. That's okay. You can have a family member provide that assistance for you. It's still very important that you sign that ballot, even if it's an X, and that is your signature now. Because in many cases, we have that information on file already from you. So again, you have that option for getting that assistance. But the fact of picking it up is something that's changed over the years. You might have heard about ballot harvesting, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead here for you, but ballot harvesting is something where you can turn over your ballot to a third party, and they'll collect it and have to deliver it to my office within 72 hours. It's been a little controversial, I think, over the years in terms of that process, but it is the law in California. It's allowed.
And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the security of Orange County's election. Can you explain for our audience what security measures are in place to make sure that people coming to the polls are really eligible to vote and that they are who they say they are?
Yeah, and I think setting the tone and give you a little bit of background is helpful. You know, a few years ago, the federal government designated elections as critical infrastructure. And what does that mean? That means that elections now are on the same level as our electrical grid, aviation, our dams in this country. Believe it or not, until just a few years ago, that wasn't the case. So what that does is it brings a lot more federal resources to the protection of our election infrastructure in this country. And I have been all over that and have been a great, I think our county has been a great partner with Homeland Security, the FBI, our local law enforcement fusion center, and we worked together pretty closely since 2016 to improve the security of the system. I will tell you that from a physical security standpoint, chain of custody, physical buildings, et cetera, all the way through the network security, it's about doubled since 2016. And I felt we had a pretty good security platform in 16. But when you marshal these resources at the federal government and you have all of these additional options in your toolbox, that has really enhanced our security. So a lot of protections on the voting system itself, as well as the network side, but then also just the protection for that ballot. So for instance, when we mail a ballot to a voter, it's one ballot per voter per record. And that ballot has to come back in that envelope with that barcode tied to that voter. So it ensures that chain of custody stays intact and remains with that voter. And when we get it back, we go through a series of checks before we ever open it. So there's a tremendous amount of security procedures in place to protect your vote.
Well, and now what if I walk into a vote center and say, hi, I'm Jane Doe, I'd like to vote, please. I mean, what happens when I get there and how am I kind of checked out to make sure that I'm accurately representing myself?
Well, we're going to ask you to tell us your address, and so we're going to look you up in our electronic check-in system. And then our team has the ability to look at other information in your record if they believe that there's anything to be suspicious about, and we can verify additional information from you. Now, in California, it's important to point out that the law prevents us from asking for identification, and that upsets a lot of people. But it is the law, and I can't do it. It's prevented under California law. So you're using the honor system here. You're coming in and saying you're Jane Doe. We're going to do some checks to the extent we can. And then you're going to sign your signature on that electronic system. And once you've done that, if that's not who you are and you are lying to us and we find out, because there are ways we can determine that, then you're committing a felony. And, you know, the payoff for that is just not worth it. I mean, if somebody wants to go to state prison to come in and say there's somebody else to try and cast a ballot, doesn't make any sense to me at all. And that's why we don't see large instances of that.
Yeah. And then what about the ballots that go into the drop boxes? How are those protected? I know the drop boxes have ways to kind of prevent like ballots from catching on fire, for example. And then also, I think you mentioned the chain of custody when those are picked up.
Right. So those drop boxes, I want to say the first thing is they are, like I mentioned before, about 1,000 pounds. They're 1/4-inch steel. And I will tell you, if a vehicle hits that, the vehicle is destroyed, not the drop box. And I can tell you firsthand from that because we've had cars hit them already. And so they are a tank that are out there. On top of that, the majority of those drop boxes are under surveillance systems. And so we have the ability to pull footage if we need to. We're the only county in California, up until I think this election, that has included a fire suppression system in those drop boxes. So if a incendiary device was put in there, that system will deploy and put out that fire immediately. The other thing that we've done is inside that box, those containers are separated along the walls, and you slide your ballot. When you put your ballot in, it actually slides down a ramp into a box that's further away from the outside. So if somebody tried to pour liquid into those boxes, it's separated from the actual ballots. So you can't do that either. And so, you know, there's a very strong security protocol in place for that. And the last thing I'll tell you is each box has a number on it. And when you drop off your ballot, if you're getting those text messages from you, we're going to tell you, we picked up your ballot from box 42, for example. So there's that level of granularity in the data, and it ensures that you can look and see and have confidence that your ballot was picked up right.
Yeah, okay. And then once November 3rd has come, what happens next? Now, some mail ballots will certainly come in after Election Day. So I think you already mentioned the deadline, but I mean, what happens basically when Election Day rolls around?
Right. So our plan is, and I've doubled capacity since COVID exploded for our ballot processing. So I will absolutely have every single ballot that my office receives by election morning ready to post those results on election night. We will be ready to tabulate those. So all that's left for us is what's been dropped off at vote centers and what has been dropped in the mail. And so for those weeks following, depending on the volume, we will just be tackling that on a daily basis. I'll be posting results at 5 o'clock every day. We're the only county in California to do that. And you'll see that every day post-election. I think, Alicia, based on, the number of ballots I expect to receive pre-election day, that we will be in a much better position to have our ballots counted much quicker post-election and get those results out as soon as possible. But I mean, as you've heard from the national dialogue, I think there's gonna be a couple of contests for sure that, you may not know the results until we get those post-election day ballots counted.
Yeah. And then just to wrap up, is there anything else that you want voters to know?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I've seen so many things over the years as an election official. I never thought that I would be running an election under a pandemic, which has been very unusual. But the reality is that election officials, day in and day out, work very hard to protect your ballot and to count your ballot. And listen, I understand the politics of this. Politics around elections has gone on in this country since it was founded. You can go back to the 1700s and hear about, we've got to watch who's counting the ballots. I understand that. But the reality is that we're working very hard to protect your ballot. And I would encourage you to track it, mail it early if you're going to do that, and just keep an eye on the process. And we're very transparent and open. And I would encourage people, if they want to watch the process, come on down to our office in Santa Ana. It's open for business.
Okay, thanks, Neal. And for everybody watching, expect a ballot in the mail sometime after October 5th. And don't forget to vote.
Thank you.